Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Christian Sands. Welcome to another episode of Welcome to the Sands Box. We are so excited today because we are interviewing two individuals that have helped shape the way we hear music, help shape who we hear it from. I'm talking about some amazing record label presidents. These two individuals I know. One I know very, very well because I'm actually on his label, and the other I don't know as well, but I've been a fan of and just the admirer of his work throughout the years. Please welcome the one and only Don Was from Blue Note and Denny Stilwell from Mack.
Hey Christian, how you doing, man?
What's happening, guys?
Good to see you.
Hey Christian.
Thank you for coming in, and hanging in the Sands box with me.
We're here to play, man.
Yeah, that's right, man. I know we had some technical difficulties earlier, but we're good to go. We're set now.
Good.
So let's dive right in, man. There's so many things I want to get across. I know we don't have a lot of time because you guys are both running companies, so I will keep this short. But I want to split up some questions with you guys because I think this is a great opportunity to just have these conversation. So the first one I have for you, and don't mind me, I'm reading my notes here. Just for both of you, these are two labels that have extensive history in the jazz music, in all music, really. And one is older than the other, of course, but I think they're both equally as powerful. So my first question is, when you first were put into the position of president, right? The labels had already existed. So what was that like taking on this historic label? Mack Avenue having George Shearing on the label, it having Gerald Wilson. I mean, Blue Note having basically everybody. What was it like? I'll start with you, Don. What was it like just taking that over?
Well, it was a thrill. It was daunting. I'm a bass player and a record producer by trade, and this was the first job I ever had in my life. So I was not really prepared for the administrative and managerial aspects of the gig.
Right.
But it was beautiful, man, because I was a fan of Blue Note Records. I bought my first Blue Note record in 1966. It was Mode for Joe by Joe Henderson.
Yeah.
And I was 14 years old. And I just loved that music and listened probably to it more than anything else throughout my life.
Yeah.
So it was like when you dream that you're flying.
Yeah,
that's when the first time they put me at a conference table with a bunch of people who worked for me sitting around, it was kind of surreal like that. Fortunately, there were some great behavioral models to follow. Right before me, Bruce Lundvall ran the company for 30 years and did such a brilliant job. And
and I think that's how we met too, through Bruce.
That's right, through Bruce. Yeah. That's absolutely right. And he was just a wonderful human being and beloved by musicians. And then the founders of the company, Alfred Lyon and Francis Wolff, they also ran it for 30 some years and built this incredible catalog. They left a mission statement that they wrote in 1939 that dedicated the company to the pursuit of authentic music and to giving artistic freedom. Uncompromising artistic freedoms, I think the way they put it, to the artists. Yeah. So I just read that mission statement every single day, and we use that as the barometer of how we behave. And you try to, at least, I guess the thing that made it easy was that there was already like a 70-some year tradition of how to run the company.
Right. And for you, Denny, I mean, there's not that long of a history there, but there is something there, especially being involved with Gretchen. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, our history, compared to Blue Note, or even compared to Verve and Impulse and some of the really storied labels, is feels like a speck of sand on a very large beach, right? I mean, this company started in 2000, essentially. So we've only got 20 years of history under our belt. So, I very much think about the label as kind of a modern jazz label. Basically representing, trying to represent, I guess, this 20-year slice of time, up to this point. So, and my involvement was fairly organic and started very early on. I actually first came in contact with the company on their third release, which was this compilation album called "The Legacy Lives On."
Right.
And I was a contractor, right? I was a hired gun for basically for sales and marketing at that point. And the relationship basically just evolved. And I became president in 2007. And at that time, it's actually very challenging because at that time you had the, iTunes was introduced in 2001. And so at the same time that the industry was really struggling with its infrastructure and its business model, we were set on this course of, hey, let's start a jazz label and let's be really aggressive with it.
Yeah.
And that's what the owners really wanted at the time was, they basically made a commitment and said, let's make a run for this. And, and in 2008, the bottom fell out of the financial markets and Tower Records went out of business and Musicland went out of business. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, how are we going to do this? Right?
Yeah.
How are we going to try to make this? And, that essentially fueled us. At that point, we looked at what was happening around us and said, we think there's opportunities here. And it was right after that we signed Christian McBride and Kenny Garrett and Stanley Jordan and Gary Burton. And, those artists basically started, a real building of the roster that included artists who had some significant jazz history and we could build on. You mentioned Gerald Wilson and some projects by George Shearing and Oscar Castroneves, some of those early records that we had, and we were looking at that period as maybe there's an opportunity here to build on that. So it was for me it was an organic transition developed out of the relationship between myself and the owners and her business partners at the time.
Yeah. Now let's take a step back now because both of you have been just involved in music for so long. Now, how did you get here? How did you get to this seat? From the beginning, from when you started, from birth. And you love music, you heard music. Like first of all, what was your first record you heard? I'll start with you, Denny. What was the first record you got?
Oh, wow. That's my parents had this. My parents were not in music, right? They were not music people, but they had this little red box of 45s. Yeah. Right. That they had just collected. It was just music that they liked, and there was all sorts of weird stuff in there, right? It was kind of some pop and country music of the time, and I had this little tiny record player, right, that you plugged in. I was a kid. I don't even know how old I was, but I wasn't even 10, I don't think. And I would sit in my room with this little record player that had this tiny little speaker on it, and I just started playing these 45s. Right. And it was Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. There was this song called Here Comes Trouble, and it was just this weird mix of stuff in there, and I just started playing those records, and I became enthralled with that, right? I mean, it's it's the common phrase that I have is you don't choose music chooses you, right? And in that moment, that I felt like that was when I was kind of chosen, like this is what I wanted to do. I didn't know that at the time, but then it it evolved from there, as I got older, I started listening to radio and started expanding my my palette a little bit and discovering different types of music. I would take my allowance that my parents gave me, and I would go. We had one little record store in this small town that I grew up. It's called the Underground, right?
Yeah.
And they had all sorts of vinyl, against this brick wall.
That sounds like a great place to get records too, by the way.
Yeah, I thought it was the coolest thing on the planet, right? The guy behind the guy behind the counter looked like he was like straight out of the '60s.
Yeah.
And of course it was a head shop too. So there was this glass case of stuff that I was not supposed to be, and I didn't know what that stuff was anyway.
Yeah.
But that's where I bought records. I would take my parents' allowance, and they didn't want me to go up there. They wouldn't allow me to go up there. So I'd get on my bike and I'd ride down there. I'd sneak down there and I would go buy albums, and then sneak them back into my room, right? And try to play them, at low volume. But that was kind of the beginning. Jazz didn't come naturally, organically from that young age. I really started that in junior high school and high school, where I started to get exposed to the world of jazz and classical music at the same time.
Yeah. Now, do you think that those early records and those early sounds kind of help you today with leading the record label and trying to, this is what we're going to produce, this is what we're going to release, we're going to release this? Like, does that have anything to do with anything that you heard when you were younger? Is there a certain trajectory that was there for you?
Yeah, I guess the thread is the music itself, right? I studied drums and percussion. I studied music in college, and one of my earliest attractions to rhythm was Cecilia by Simon and Garfunkel. The rhythms in that record just really attracted me. I played that song over and over and over again. I never really understood why I was attracted to that, but that started me on a pathway toward toward drums and percussion, but also listening to the music behind the music, listening to what the bass part was doing, listening to the production, and listening to the drums, and trying to understand how it all fit together. So in the sense of having a creative background, even though I'm not a creative now, right? I'm not playing anymore, but having that creative background and an interest.
I mean, I don't know, because you have that guitar behind you. So I mean, I beg to differ.
That's for my stressful moments, right?
Right. That's right.
So I can sit around and play a little bit, just relax a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I noodle around on the guitar and a little bit, and play a little bit of drums just privately, but I'm not playing out.
Yeah, me and Warren were talking about, we got to get you on a record or something like that. We're like, we got to get Denny, we got to get him to play.
Trust me, you don't want that. You'll spend a lot of time editing those tracks.
Right. Now, Don, so we met with through Bruce Lundvall, and I remember that I had spoken to you about just being a part of the Blue Note family, and great conversation. Obviously, I went with Denny, but the question I have for you, and this is actually for you, Denny. I'll split it up this way. What do you look for when you're looking to sign a young artist, somebody that's new, somebody that, no one really has ever heard before? What do you look for?
Well, it's a good question, man. A couple answers to that. The first is that, I am a musician, and as you know, if you, let's say you and I, we could probably go out to lunch with Charles Manson and sit at the table, and it might, after about 15 or 20 minutes, we might say, something might be a little off with this guy.
Yeah.
But with a musician, you play with someone for 5 minutes, you know who they are.
Yeah.
So you don't have to actually stand there and play to hear that in the music. So so the first thing is to look for someone like yourself, who's coming from a genuine and soulful and honest place. I'm not impressed by how many notes anybody can play. I don't care about acrobatics. I care about emotional expression, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first. So you look for someone who's for real. And then the other thing is you look for someone you can help. There's a lot of beautiful stuff that comes my way that I don't think is right for us. That we may not be the best company to market that stuff. And when you sign an artist, you take on a responsibility to deliver for them. You may not be able, you certainly can't predict things like Grammys or even #1 records, but you can make your best effort to make sure that music is heard by as many people as possible.
Yeah.
So that's the other part of the bargain. You don't want to let people down.
Yeah.
And really that kind of, I've been doing it now for 10 years, and that changes depending on what the music world is like. And I've seen it shift so much that, Spotify and the streaming services, they weren't like the major sources of information back, when I started, which isn't really that. It's 10 years, it's not even that long. So you see a thing shift, but that's basically it,
Yeah. So now with Denny, I mean, prior to me signing with Mack Avenue, we had a relationship before that, and I think it was with, I know a lot of it was with Christian McBride, but I basically play with everybody: Tia Fuller, Sean Jones, Warren Wolf. I did some stuff with Danilo, John Beasley. So there was a lot of people like that I knew that were on Mack Avenue, and I think that's how we met a few of those times with those musicians. So my question for you, part 2 of that, is signing a new artist. Where do you find them? Do you go out listening for them? I mean, like, we've had our conversations at gigs or in LA, but where exactly do you hear them? Do you listen to records? How does this work for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have a great, partner in crime, and Will Wakefield, who's our head of A&R, and we tag team on, on just about everything. But that process of discovery has changed so much. Just like Don was saying about streaming, that the internet and online activities have given us access to tools that we didn't have 20 years ago. And so a lot of, I think, what used to be going out and seeing an artist in a club first has kind of turned around a little bit, I think. I mean, we've got all the online access, and you can see videos on YouTube, and you can go to a website, and a lot of times there's music that's already available, and so you can kind of start to get a sense for, what an artist is doing early on. And then in a way that's cemented or confirmed by the live experience, right? So it's there's no magic, there's no magic to it, in a sense. And there's a lot of a lot of artists will submit things to us. Hey, you got to hear this cat, right? Hey, there's this this new young singer coming up that we think you should pay attention to, and you really want to pay attention to those things and pay attention to those recommendations, right? And then there's people on the business side too, who's that you trust, whose ears that you trust or have had successes, and you want to when there's an artist that's coming to your attention, pay attention to those. There's a lot of music. There's so much music to process. It's almost impossible to go through and listen to everything and give some really solid, meaningful feedback, right? So you're looking for those telltale signs that say, hey, you really should pay attention to this. When I had so many opportunities to see you perform when you were performing in the McBride Trio,
right?
It was a front row seat to your development, so to speak.
Yeah.
In that sense, I felt like it was somewhat of a no-brainer that that we partner up with you, and
we had a lot of conversations. I mean, I remember you would ask me, hey, what are you working on? Do you have a group? What sort of sound are you leaning towards right now? I mean, and every time for me, I always, as the artist, I was just like, this is cool. Somebody's really interested in what I'm doing, you know, like somebody's kind of interested in like the things that I'm trying, even though the conversation that we're having today might be a little different than the last conversation we had. But the fact that that conversation was still being had, you know, for the artist, for me, it made me feel real good. And it was just like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Whether this works out or not, this is a relationship that we've developed because somebody likes what I do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, when we had a lot of conversations about, you know, about you internally, you know, and you had mentioned Gretchen earlier, and, you know, back then, you know, she was involved in a lot of those decisions, right? And you know, and presenting music to her and getting her ears, because her ears are amazing.
Right.
And her feedback. And at that point in time, our head of A&R was a gentleman named Al Pryor. You know, so, you know, we had a lot of discussions internally to talk about, you know, not just you, but some of the other artists that we were signing at the time, and, you know, seeing if we could help, if we could be, you know, a good midwife, so to speak, right? To take your music out to the rest of the world, right? And start your recording career. And we take those conversations very seriously, and those decisions are not easy. There's so much great music.
Yeah. So now, speaking of just music and live performances, and this is kind of where you possibly see some of your potential artists or the artists that you have now. I mean, now that we're in this pandemic where there aren't any live performances going on, you know, how is the music industry? Like, how are they adapting to that? How are record labels adapting to the absence of live performance now?
That's a very good question, man. You know, I mean, there's YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I know for artists it's hard.
It's hard. I can't say that since March we've signed anybody based on seeing them live. Well, we certainly haven't. You know, it's a good question. It not only has it hurt in terms of finding new artists and discovering people, but it's really hurt in terms of marketing records, you know, getting out and play. When I first took the gig, I thought, we have to get modern here. This is all about, you know, social media. You know, I went to my first marketing meeting. I thought it sounded like the same thing I was hearing 30 years ago. But after a while, I learned that there's some tried and true methods that are the most effective, and certainly in this world. And it's still the best thing is to market a record like you're running for president or something. You go out and you go from city to city. Yeah, they're just little things. Like if an artist is going to play in Minneapolis one night and they have a new record out, don't book Detroit the next night. Stay in Minneapolis and let's do a day of going, you know, do one interview. Just do one interview. Do one, you know, newspaper interview, one radio interview, then go to Detroit and do the same thing. If you go from city to city, 30 cities, I guarantee next time you come back, you'll have twice as many people coming to see you play. So we've completely lost that. And that's impacted everyone from, you know, Nora Jones is our biggest artist, and she had a 1.5 year long tour planned and put out an album this year and had to cancel those dates. So that's affected everyone from her to someone like Emmanuel Wilkins, who's, you know, working his new album and really needed to get out and expose it to people. Yeah.
And so, you know, I'll ask you this, Denny, do you think this is going to change everything going forward now? You know, do you think once, you know, the pandemic goes away and the vaccines happen and who knows whatever happens, do you think this is going to actually affect how people receive their music now, how artists and record labels deliver the music?
Yeah, I mean that's a that's a good question, because you know, nobody has a crystal ball, and and I certainly don't. You know what it feels like right now, and Don and I were talking a little bit about this with Tim, you know, this morning. It feels like there's going to be a lot of pent up demand for live performances, and so, you know, the venues that are, you know, able to hang on and make it through the pandemic, you know, and the agents that are able to hang on, the agents who book those gigs and make those gigs happen for, for the artists. I think it feels like there's going to be, a solid touring schedule and, a really solid business there, that model is going to come back, although there's probably going to be fewer players involved. It certainly, I think, there's been this great technological development in these virtual concerts that have happened. And there's some artists who've been able to get some meaningful views, looking at the global nature of having a virtual concert, even though sometimes the setting is, not as attractive as a jazz club or, or some other type of a concert venue, of course. It doesn't feel like that's going to go away entirely. Somehow it feels like that's going to evolve, and the virtual element of live performances is going to stay with us in some way. I don't know that for sure, but it's hard to imagine that we've gone through this transition. And a lot of times you get a lot of innovation that happens out of these types of downturns, right? This cycle is, you're trying to solve a problem here during the pandemic. And for our artists, the problem was, how do we perform live because we need to, from our souls, but how do we perform live because that's how we make a living as well, right? Or one of the key ways that we make a living. So some artists have been, very creative with that. They've been innovative with that. And it feels like that something is gonna stick with, with that. So we're hopeful that, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but I think right now that tunnel is pretty long. Right. It's like, just as the vaccine is starting to roll out. Just because the vaccine has started to roll out, and we're not going to be seeing us, come back around in February or March or whatever. I think, we're going to be looking at, late summer or fall, I think, before we get back to, some sense of normal. And even then it won't be 100%, I don't think.
So speaking of speaking of normal, right? So before the pandemic and COVID, and also bringing in the Monterey Jazz Festival, I am the artist in residence for Monterey Jazz Festival. So I want to talk about this aspect of it. What role does, and I'll say does because it still does, what role do you think festivals play with being hand in hand with the record labels? Is there something that they both do together? Is there a way that they work together to help spread the music and spread the artistry of each artist that you have? Do you think there's a relation between the two?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll tell you, Monterey Jazz Festival is my favorite festival. I was attending that before I was the president of a record company, and there's something really special about that festival, and it's that lawn where everybody sits on the grass and eats ribs and Jamaican food, and it's a really, you never feel threatened at that festival. It's so relaxed. And what Monterey Jazz Festival does is it builds a sense of community. You're among like-minded people who are bonded together by the love for this music, which transcends it's not like something that you play in the background. You don't have to be a musician to live that music. That music speaks to you and helps define who you are. And going to that festival further defines who you are, and you become aware that there are other like-minded people. I don't know how many people pass through the gates. 20, 30,000 people over the course of the weekend. I'm not sure, but that's a lot of people to feel bonded with. And I think that's a huge function. I think that's an important thing about jazz, is that it's kind of like this international secret club. I'm glad it's not as big as Justin Bieber or anything like that. I'm glad that it's something that bubbles under the surface a little bit, and that people really are proud to listen to. That it's music that you're in. It's like a secret society. Is what attracted me to it. When I was 14, I'd look at those Francis Wolff pictures from Rudy Van Gelder's studio on the Blue Note albums, and I'd see what kind of room was that? The walls were all black, and there was cigarette smoke, and they were wearing cool clothes, and there were these saxophones, and I wanted to be a part of that so badly. I didn't want to like be in a rock and roll band. I wanted to be where those guys were.
Yeah.
And so I think that helps the music a lot.
Yeah. Real quick, pause, Ryan. Sorry about that. I kept getting a text here. It was Terry Lynn Carrington. Hey, what are you doing? Sorry. I'm working. So we'll edit all that out. Okay.
Have her call in. Yeah.
Right. Hey, Ryan, how are we doing on time, by the way?
I mean, we're pretty good. We can probably go for another 5 or 10.
Awesome. Okay. Man, thank you guys for doing this.
Of course.
Yeah, man.
Okay. So I'll ask this question here. Going back to the online discussion that we were having, and just talking about artists being creative and labels being creative in distributing the music to listeners. Do you think that there's a certain platform online that's best served for a certain genre? Like, is YouTube better for a certain thing? Is Twitter better for a certain genre? I mean, I'll ask you that, Denny. What do you think?
Well, as a label, you have to have your music everywhere, right? Yeah. I mean, that's really job one, right? If we're going to be, really good partner for our artists, a good business partner, then you want to have the music wherever the fans are, right? So, there are certainly emerging technologies that are challenging for jazz. There's not a lot of audience on TikTok. There's for us right now, like that kind of thing. But that could have been said early on about Facebook when it was first developed. Which has become a pretty major online platform for for adult music, because that's where a lot of adults are hanging out these days, online. Yeah. So, that's as a social media platform, of course. But our goal is essentially to make sure that, that we're working closely with Spotify and with Amazon and obviously with Apple, and then also the emerging services too, like Qobuz and Tidal, that, that are putting a spotlight on high definition music. And making sure that we're involved early on in those technologies, and identifying any opportunities that might be there for us and for our artists. Yeah. So so it's you can always play favorites. I think one over the other. You might like one interface over the other interface. You might like the sound quality on one service more than the other. Certainly, there might be a larger jazz audience on one service than the other. But the reality for us is that even though we have to know those things in order to be, just good, smart business people and a good, smart record label, you really have to be everywhere. That's how we look at it.
Yeah. And my last question for you guys, this is actually kind of a fun question. Because you both are a part of these major labels. If you could sign anybody, let me see if I can put this together. If you could sign anyone out of the entire history of music, right? Out of all of it, right? I'll make it easier. I'll give you 3. Who would they be? What 3 artists would you sign out of everything? Doesn't have to be jazz. It could be anything.
I'll go with the letter M. Okay. Muddy Waters.
Yeah.
Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Miles Davis. Marvin Gaye.
Okay. All right. Yeah, man. Jeez. But thank you guys very much for hanging out with me today, answering some questions. I know you guys are busy, but I appreciate it. Music appreciates it. The audience appreciates it. You know, and until the next time, thank you guys very much.
Yeah,
Great to
thanks,
see you.
Christian.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us.